Hi there, grade 12s. Welcome to Dandelion Delphi tutorials. We're going to have a look at the OOP question of the Supplementary of 2017. In these older papers, those would be question 2, but you can expect it as a question 3 in your final exams. These papers also still include a Java, so you can ignore those parts. But here you have the Delphi attributes and then their description. There is a unique number for the card holder, but they don't tell us whether it is an integer, real, or string number. So that is something you would have to just double check in your class. Then the cell phone number that we would assume is a string, number of visits, and loyalty points, and then a health level of S, G, or P. So the card number was a string, and there's the cell number as a string, and these two as integers, and then the health level as a char data type. The first question asks us to write the constructor method. Receiving, that means it's the parameters they're going to indicate now, the card number, cell phone number, and the loyalty card points. As you can see, not all the attributes are received, and they don't have to be. They also don't all need to be initialized in your constructor, but they often are, as in this case here they explain that the health food level must be set to S, which is your lowest level, and that the number of visits must be set to 0. Press pause and try it yourself. Here is my constructor create, receiving only those 3 values as parameters. The first 2 must be string because we want to match up these parameters with a data type of the attributes they're going to give values to, and the points would be integer. You then press Ctrl-Shift-C and you complete your create. Remember your parameters on the right and your attributes or fields on the left. Whether you call them attributes or fields, those words start with an A or an F. That must be on the left. Very important, else they won't have values. And P is later in the alphabet, so they are on the right. Then we have the number of visits set to 0 and then the health level set to S. Remember, you want to do one method at a time. Don't create all the signatures and do them all at once. Sometimes as we go along, we work out actually what we are supposed to do after only doing the first couple of methods. So this question is asking us to write a mutator. Just a reminder, mutators are procedures and they're always public. Sometimes they receive a parameter and sometimes they don't. But here they ask that we have to set the attribute for the number of visits to the value received. So therefore we have a number received for the number of visits. These questions sometimes ask you to set the attribute, as in this case, and sometimes it asks you to add on to the existing number of visits. Press pause and try it yourself. It should be 2 easy marks. Here is my procedure set visits, and I'm receiving a number for the number of days they visited. If you have a look there, that would be an integer, therefore this number here is an integer. Constructors and mutators look very similar in their code. If you have a look here, all it's doing is my field or attribute is on the left, and the parameter on the right is giving this field a value. The next question is asking us to create this method increase loyalty points, and it also receives a parameter, so that's the total amount spent, and then we need to increase the loyalty points based on that amount received. For every 4 Rand that they spend, 1 loyalty point is awarded. There is no mention in here that it's returning a result, therefore it would be a procedure. Press pause and try it yourself. Here's my procedure increase loyalty points, receiving that amount. Since it's money, we'd assume that it is a real value. And they asked us to increase the existing loyalty points, so you would have to put the loyalty points on both sides of the assignment statement. We want to make a change to loyalty points, but we want to take the existing points and add onto it or increase it as the question asked. And they said for every 4 Rand, points are allocated. but we want to make sure that this here is an integer, and also we don't want to have part of 4 rand. We want to say 4 rand, divide by 4, and then round it down. We could also use this method here where we only round down the amount and then use div 4. These two answers will give you the same answer. Instead of floor, you would also be able to use trunk. The next method also receives a value. Well, it actually receives two values. One for the total amount that you spent, and then one for the amount that you spent on health food. And then you have to calculate the percentage that health food was of the total amount spent. And according to that, you need to set the health level. Again, I don't see a return or result, so therefore this would be a procedure, making a change to the health level. And these codes are assigned according to these percentages. Press pause and try it yourself. Whenever you see a table like this in any of the questions, it means it's a nested if or a case statement. I always use a case if possible, but in this case, it's not possible because we are testing a percentage which is real, and case statements use ordinal values which can only be integer or char. So therefore, it would have to be a nested if statement. Here is my procedure, update health level, receiving two values, one for the total amount and one for what they spent on their healthy food, both as real values or real parameters. And in this procedure, I have a local variable there calculating the percentage or storing the percentage that the health amount is of the total amount spent. I've multiplied by 100, so therefore I'll use 10 and 40 here, but if you didn't do that, you could use 0.1 and 0.4 there. So both of them would score full marks. Important here is that this percentage is less than 10 and not less than or equal to. If it's less than 10, we set the health level to S. Else we test if the percentage is less than 40, then the health level will be G. And then finally, the only option that is left is that the percentage is more than 40 and therefore a P. You would see that I excluded these conditions here because they're really not needed. However, if you added them, they have to be correct. If the percentage was, let's say, 9%, the health level will be set to S, and all of this will be ignored because this is in the else of this if statement. So therefore, when this code runs, the percentage will be 10% or more. For the same reason, I don't have to test here at the bottom if the percentage is greater or equal to 40. Because if it's less than 10, it will run this. If it's less than 40, it will run this. And the only time it runs this part here is when the percentage is 40% or more. For this next question, the skeleton code was provided, but we'll get to that later. And this is where we have to determine whether the access code is correct or not. So here they're explaining to you how this access code was created, and you need to test it. So the access code is a parameter, and you need to do the following calculations using the cell phone number to determine whether that access code was correct. Here are the steps. It's quite lengthy. First, you need to remove all the zeros from the cell phone number. So what I suggest you do is press pause and just do that for now, storing that answer as a string, as a local variable for that function. Then we have to determine the sum of the remaining digits. If the number of remaining digits is even, we are going to use every two numbers as one number. So in other words, we've removed the zeros there. We're going to take 82 like there, and then we're going to add to that 34, and then we're going to add to that 21, and then we're going to add to that 13, and that's the answer that we then have to compare with the access code received. If, however, the numbers after you've removed the zeros is odd, so the number of numbers there is odd, what we'll do is we're going to take the first digit as a single digit. And then from there on, so you can see there the 8 is on its own. And from there on, we're going to take every 2 digits and we're going to add them together. There are many correct ways of doing this question. So what I suggest you do is press pause and try it yourself. So it's important to take note of what is given. We have this access code that we received as a parameter, but very important is that your result is Boolean. So your result must return a true or a false. You'll see that in this given code they have used S. You are allowed to do that, but I always suggest that you use the P as the parameter. So just for yourself, you can distinguish between what is a parameter and what is a local variable. This top part here of mine is just removing the zeros. Remember, whenever you want to remove characters from a string, you want to build a new string without those characters. So what I'm doing here, remember we're using the length, well, the cell phone number, which is the attribute. So I'm going to loop from 1 to the length of that cell phone number. And if the current character is not a 0, I'm going to add it to this S cell, my local variable of my function. You'll see I've declared it there as a string. This here is important. Since I'm using a variable on both sides of the assignment statement, it needs to be initialized. I have a loop, and when we have a loop and we need to initialize, we are going to initialize directly above the loop. Just to recap, if you had this as part of a statement that was not inside of a loop, it will probably go in form on activate, which would not be applicable to this question. I'm just trying to remind you of things that you guys often forget. So for the same reason, ISUM here is inside of the loop, it needs to be initialized. We do not have to initialize strings or integers or real variables as 0 or empty strings. We could initialize them to a number. So remember, when it's the cell phone number that is left here has an odd length, then I have to use the first digit as my starting point, and from there on I'm going to add every 2 digits together as a number. So what I've done here is said, if the length is odd, I'm going to use the first character of the cell phone number, the one without the zeros now, and that would be my starting point. And if it wasn't odd, so the length was even, I'm going to make my starting point 0. Now, to get rid of that first character that I've already added, I've just used my delete procedure here to delete from character 1 for 1. So now, when I'm running this here, the length of the cell will be even because I've deleted the first character if the length was odd. So ISUM now have been initialized, and now I'm going to loop from 1 to the length of that cell phone number without the 0. So I've put an example there for you that is from the paper. Now I want to copy out 2 at a time and add them together to the sum. So what I've done here is I've tested if k is odd. In other words, if it's 1, 3, 5, or 7. That means I'm at the start of 2 digits that I need to copy out. And now I'm going to use copy the cell from the position I'm at, so my k, 1, 3, 5, and 7, and copy out 2 characters. Change them to an integer. You could have done all of this in one line. I just often break it up to help you guys understand this better. But I have changed it to an integer iDigit, and now I have my running total here of ISUM, adding iDigit to that sum. If k is even, like for example at 2, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to loop again, and k will change then to 3, where I will copy out again the next 2 characters and add them to my sum. Finally, you have to test if this calculated sum is the same as the access code received as a parameter. The access code was a string, so therefore I'm using into string here on isum. You possibly could have used a string to int on the access code, but we don't yet know what it's receiving. So for that reason, I know that I can into string that. I'd rather just do that there, unless you've read through the whole paper and see that the access code could only be numbers. You could have used string to int on that side. What was very important that your result gets a value, either true or false. Sometimes people forget to assign the result to false. But if this calculated sum here is equal to the access code, that means it is true, else it means it is false. Now, can you remember what this kind of calculation is called? It's actually part of our validation. I know it's not, I don't think it's in the theory books, but we are doing a check digit of a kind, because we are doing a sum with our numbers that we have to check if it is equal to something else. It's very similar to a check digit question. If you're unsure what I'm talking about, go and Google how your ID number works, because you actually have in your ID number, you have a check digit as the last digit, and you can do sums with the first 12 numbers of your ID number to test if it's equal to the last one, and then it's valid. That's a true story. So Google it and see if you can write that code. It's excellent practice for string handling, which is also covered here. We are now asked to write a method called identify star shopper that will return. I can immediately start coding this by writing function, because it's returning a value, identify star shopper, and then I have to check, do I have parameters or not? And then I also have to see what is the data type, but I often read the first part and then just start my function. So the person is a star shopper if they earned more than 2,000 loyalty points and the shop was visited more than 10 times during the month, or if their health level of the card holder is platinum. The string to be returned. So therefore my function has a string data type. I don't see any mention here of a parameter being received. So that would be no parameters, a function with a string data type, and it's either going to be star shopper or an empty string. Press pause and try it yourself. Here is my function identify star shopper as a string data type, and that was basically it for this function. I have initialized my result to an empty string. You could also have had an else and then that line inside of your else. What I'm doing here is there's two options. It's either this or it's that. This one is easy. Health level is P, platinum, and you're a star shopper. So you can see how I group this together, because it's either platinum or both of these conditions must be true. They must have loyalty points of more than, don't put an equal sign there, you'll see the question said more than 2,000, and number of visits must be more than 10, not 10 or more than 10, so no equal sign there. If one of these conditions are true, then the result is star shopper. You will see that the toString has been provided, so just take note of that. Remember, it's a good time to save and run your program to sort out those syntax errors before you move on to the main form. In this paper it would be question 2.2, but in your final it will be question 3.2. Here they explain in the main form, this is now the first button of the main form, that the user will select the card number from a combo box, and then once this number is selected, you will be provided with a cell phone number and the number of loyalty points earned previously from this purchase. But then you have to loop through a text file and do the following, but let's just go to the text file first. So every 3 lines represents this transaction. So the first line would be the card holder number, and then the total amount of purchases, and then the amount spent on health food. So if you have a look at this, the first 3 lines there belongs to one person, and then the next 3 lines to another. But you can see that the purchase card, the loyalty card number, appears more than once. Before we start looping, we need to instantiate the object using the input then from the user. Break this question down in small pieces and press pause and just do that first bit. Once the object has been created, you are able to use other methods, and you need to use isCorrect to determine if the access code was entered correctly. And if it was, then you need to loop through this text file. And you need to determine the total amount spent per month. So you would see that, remember I showed you just now that the same card number appears many times, so you have to add them all up. And also the amount spent on health products and the number of times they visited this shop. Press pause and just do this bit for now. Outside this loop, you need to use the relevant methods from your class to update the number of loyalty points and the health code and the number of times that they visited the shop. You also need to enable a button, and if the access code is not correct, display a message and then clear that access code from the text box. Make sure that you use these card numbers and these access codes for testing purposes. The example of input here are for correct access codes. So if you just make a change to one of them and test it, it should give you a message, and the button should also not be enabled for question 2.2.2. Press pause and try it yourself. I'll show you the memo for the whole question just now. So we're getting input from a combo box. Yes, you can use the .text property. But since you have to know this code for the radio group and list box, I suggest you use this. So just to practice this some more. Combo box, dot items, square bracket, name of the combo box, dot item index is what they selected as S card. It was important to have this first because whatever they selected then displayed some values for you here. And the cell phone number was displayed in a label, as well as the loyalty points. Little bit funny because we have to now get input from that label, which we usually don't do, but that's fine. We can do that. Put the cell phone number as a local variable there on the left, with the dot caption there of the label on the right. Then the loyalty points also from the caption of a label, but remember to string to int it because we want to call the constructor that needs an integer as the loyalty points. And then the code there that we will use later from the edit box. Remember my trick to remember that very important line of code, because without this line, you are not going to be able to run this and test this program. You copy that declaration, you paste it here, you change that to an equal sign, you add your dot create, open the brackets, and it's going to give you hints as to what parameters it had, and you have to match that with your arguments. If that hint does not appear, just go back to your class and see where you have declared your constructor and match those parameters with the arguments here. The Hodidas have come for their lesson. So we have the local variables here, they are called arguments, and then we have the parameters. And these two, the arguments and the parameters, must match in NOD, number, order, and data type. There were 3 parameters, so we need 3 arguments. Order, card, cell, and points. Card, cell, and my loyalty points. And then finally data types, 2 strings and 1 integer. But note that when we declare these parameters or the constructor, that we add the data types, but where we call the constructor create, we are not going to add data types in here. Also important is that these variables will receive a value before you call this constructor create. And this line here is called instantiating the object, and will be the last time that you use this T card holder. From now on, you'll use the object that is declared for you up there. This line of code needs to run before you can use any other method of your class. We were told to use the isCorrect method. It was a function returning a true or a false, a Boolean function that needed to receive a parameter. So this nod is not only for your constructor create, it's for any of your methods. So we need to send it the code to test if this was correct. You can add here equals to true, but remember your if statement will by default test if a function returning a Boolean result is true. You could have said equals to false and use a begin and end here and then display the message that's at the bottom with an exit. But since some teachers don't like that, I thought I'll do this video a little differently. Then we have the testing if the file exists. It did not tell me to test if the file exists. But in previous years when I was marking matric finals, we were told that learners always need to test if the file exists, whether it was asked or not. So I have tested there if the file exists, displayed a message and exit the procedure to then continue the code here if it did exist. For those teachers that prefer the else, you would now not have an exit there, you would have an else and another begin and end. But I just thought it would clutter this page. It's already too much to handle in terms of begins and ends. So let's just work with this for now. I'm still in the if statement for the isCorrect. I'm going to count the number of visits. That's why I initialized it there. And I'm going to use R amount on both sides of the assignment statement as well as R healthy. And for that reason, I initialized it above the loop. Then I have my assign file, T file to the text file as you've done in grade 11. Reset the file while not end of file. And there'll be a begin and an end. But this is a little different from what we usually get. We're going to read the first line, and the first line is the card number. I've copied and pasted here as a comment, an example for you from the text file. I then want to see if I am at a line that contains the card number that the person selected. This was my local variable from the combo box. And I always just use uppercase on both sides when I am asked to test two strings, unless it tells me that it should not be case sensitive. But in this case it didn't, so I just always add my uppercase anyway. And this if has a begin and an end. If I find this card number, I'm then going to increase the number of visits. So I've read this line. I know now when I'm in this if statement that I am at a line of the card selected. So now I need to read the next line. So inside of this while loop, I actually have 3 read lines. First one, testing for the card number. The second one for that total amount that they spent. And that I'm reading here from the text file into R new. I don't know if you know this, but you don't have to store or read into a string. You can actually read into another data type. So I've just read that line into a real variable R new. But you can, if you want to, read it into a string and then string to float that value into another value. And then I'm going to add that amount that I've just read to R amount, which would be my total amount. Then I'm going to read again. And this is the health amount. So then I've just overwritten R new. I've already added it there. So there's no need to create another variable, but you are allowed to if you want to. Read line from the text file into this variable. And now I'm adding that to my health total. There's the end of this blue if. Good idea is actually to comment your ends. And this is the end of my while. Don't forget your close file. Still inside of that if statement that the access code was correct, I'm now calling my procedures. There were 3 to be called. The one sets the number of visits to the total number of visits that I calculated there. And then I have update the health level where it needs 2 arguments. It had 2 parameters. The amount first and then the health amount second. And then I'm going to increase my loyalty points by sending it the total amount. I also need to enable this button for question 2.2.2. And then if is correct, that's the if statement there. If is correct is false, it will run this code here at the bottom to display a message the access code is correct and then to clear that edit box. Here is the last question for this paper where you had to write code to call the toString method to display the card holder information in the output area. That would be a rich edit. And then the method created in 2.1.6 must be used to indicate if they were a star shopper or not. Remember, we created that one just now. And here's an example of output. Press pause and try it yourself. Before you continue, you want to test your output for this input as well. So press pause and try it yourself, and I'll show you the memo soon. All we had to do in this button is call the toString. Remember, toString is a function, so part of another statement, in this case the rich edit, object.toString. Remember, our functions, our procedures look like this, so they stand on their own, whereas functions are part of other statements. And then also the identify star shopper, it returned a string, so therefore I can also call it inside of the rich edit. So just the name of the object dot identify star shopper. And that was it. Thank you guys for watching Dandelion Delphi tutorials. If you want more explanations and things that you can study for this question, the OOP question, in this paper it was question 2, but in your final it will be question 3. Go to Dandelion Delphi book 3. Please remember to leave some comments if you have any questions or things that you would like me to explain, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you soon.